Welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to welcome you here tonight to RARE's first Conversation for Conservation. We are so pleased you are able to join us. We are very excited to connect with you all tonight during this first event of the year. So happy 2021, everyone. I think it's going to be a very exciting year for RARE because we celebrate all that you have helped us achieve in now actually 20 years of conservation research and education. And tonight, we're really kicking off our 20th anniversary year here with you. So I hope everyone had a chance to watch and enjoy The Messenger during the last 48 hours while the film was available. This film was chosen to kick off the year because it discusses the critical relationship between the natural world and humans, telling the story of the beautiful and important songbirds. And some of you might remember from previous communications our little Pedro, who is a yellow warbler that was featured in a RARE newsletter a few years back. And along with thousands of other yellow warblers, Pedro actually makes the 4,000-kilometer trek to South America and back to Canada. So volunteer bird members discovered that year after year, Pedro actually returns to RARE to access the wetlands and wooded areas and feast on insects. And amazingly, Pedro had actually a flying buddy as well, and his name was Louis, who also made the trip, landing in our nets just a short time after Pedro. So Pedro and Louis really are great examples of how RARE connects to conservation globally and really have become our two little mascots in a way. And I'm sure many of you have already been thinking about New Year's resolutions over the last months as well, as we look ahead to what we want to all accomplish over the next year. But as we reflect on the film that many of you hopefully just watched, The Messenger, and as we listen to David Agro speak next tonight, I hope you will still find some room in those resolutions to help us with the critical job of conservation in this highly populated area of the country. That also happens to be one of Canada's areas of highest biodiversity. There's really a lot of at stake if we don't protect these sensitive green spaces like the ones that are under RARE stewardship. So we invite you tonight to join us to make a resolution that will be fairly easy to keep compared to some others we tend to make. What we are asking you is we're asking you to join us in our New Year's resolution to turn the map green for as little as $2 per square meter. And you can help us actually reach a very ambitious goal this year. So I'm very happy and pleased to announce, and very thankful as well, that the RARE Board of Directors invites you to join us in our New Year's resolution to turn the map green and to raise $30,000 before Earth Day, that's April 22nd this year, to protect local lands forever. Thanks to the generosity of several friends of RARE who have matched our board members' personal contributions, as of tonight, we have already raised $15,200. So please help us raise the additional almost $15,000 before Earth Day by joining them so that we can meet our $30,000 goal for the lands and for the birds. We invite you to really make a resolution this year to protect local habitat, because without this protection, Pedro's favorite place at RARE would be in danger of succumbing to the pressures of urbanization, invasive species, pollution, and deforestation. And we really do want him to come back every year with his little friend, Louis. The lockdown measures this year have already been tough on many people, and we are all very well aware that 2020 was a difficult year. And while a good part of the province remains in lockdown still, our trails are still open, and they have been open this entire time. And we really absolutely welcome you to spend time outdoors, breathing fresh air and getting sunshine this winter. We had a beautiful day today, while following all the social distancing and gathering rules right on our trails. When you visit the RARE trails, keep an eye out for the Turn the Map Green poster that will be posted at our trailheads. Each poster will have a little QR code that, if you have a cell phone, can take you right to where you can symbolically adopt a square meter or many square meters of this precious natural treasure for just $2 per square meter. Or you can simply go to our website and donate and protect really as large a piece of RARE as you'd like, intact and in perpetuity. And on Earth Day, we will hopefully meet again, and even if it's virtually, and we will announce how much we raised and make more exciting announcements then. So some of you may may see a little bit of a preview in the talk tonight. And there's a lot of interesting things scheduled coming up this year for the rest of our 20th anniversary, because we really do want to celebrate with all of you. But now I will turn things over to David Agro, who is tonight's guest speaker. I'm very excited because David is so knowledgeable in all things birds and conservation, because he is a passionate conservationist, an award-winning architect, and really one of the world's foremost ornithologists, and also an international ambassador for RARE. He was part of the team that discovered the Hokotoko ant pitter in the mountains of southern Ecuador. Sadly, I have never seen one personally myself. I've only seen a little stuffy, and I asked a really stupid question because I thought, oh, that's a strange looking Canada goose. No, it was the Hokotoko. David works to protect habitats for critically endangered species in Latin America and Canada. So having done work both locally and internationally, he really does know the important connection between our local actions and what we do here and the global change and positive impact it can have. There's going to be some time after David's talk for questions. So if you have something you'd like to ask, please use the Q&A box rather than the chat box. So I have an option to hopefully post your questions to David after the talk. And with this, I say thank you and welcome, David.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. And because I enjoy talking about this stuff so much, sometimes I can go on a bit. So Stephanie has my text number and she will prod me if I go on too long. So when Stephanie asked me to do this talk, they asked me to address how some of the themes of how we're all connected, and especially after the messenger talking about migration, I thought these are a number of ideas that I've been thinking about how things are working, so connected with energy, air, water, and soil. And as we move forward in addressing climate change, these issues are going to become more and more important. So as you just saw in the messenger, there were a number of species that are migrating many places and great distances. But there are also different mammals, like the humpback whales. Here's some of their migration routes. There are fish, like the freshwater eel. And of course, there are insects, like the monarch butterfly. But some of you may have seen some of the dragonfly migrations that come through southern Ontario in the fall. One might ask, why are they doing it? Well, here's the main reason. There are lots of reasons why animals migrate, but basically they're following the energy of the sun, and this pulse of energy comes onto the planet. And in the northern and southern hemispheres, there's an enormous biological productivity that happens. Anyone who stepped out in spring into the mosquitoes or black flies understand what that's like. But if you live near a wetland, you'll see lots of chironomids and other insects. And this is a massive food resource for many of the animals that are coming here. Now, unlike the tropics where it's warm all year, the northern hemisphere has to do something about storing some of that energy, or the species have to have a strategy to protect themselves. The migrants can move, but not everything can move. So one of the chief ways to store resources is either seeds, nuts, but also a lot of energy and resources is stored in the soil. And these are two pictures of the soil profiles of grasslands on the right and forests on the left. And this graph in the middle shows how much organic matter is part of the soil profile. And as most of you know, one of the great features of the North American Midwest and prairies and even Southern Ontario is the vast fertile soils that we had here, which are so good for agriculture. Now, when I was a student in university at Waterloo, I went to help a friend of mine do some work on an agricultural grid dig just south of the 403 on the Grand River. This is not a photograph of that. Unfortunately, at the time, I didn't even think about this. But if you look at this photograph, there is a indigenous site down below, and then just above it is a War of 1812 site, uh, and then which is about 2 inches different. And then there's this massive pile of soil on top. I'm going to go back to why I'm showing this other site, which is from a different area in a minute. But that puzzled me for a long time until one time when I was in Ecuador, and please ignore it, that's a very much younger version of me. But what I'd like to direct your attention to is the clarity of this stream here. And this area of Ecuador is in the northwest, and it's got some of the highest amounts of rainfall on Earth. There's about 4,000 millimeters of rain a year. That's 4 meters. And shortly after this photograph was taken, the water went up about 1.5 feet, and it was absolutely clear. Even though there was this massive rainstorm causing so much rainfall, the water was clear. And at that point, I started to understand the photograph from the soil profile in the Grand River. And basically what happened is after the Europeans arrived here, they cut down most of the forest and the layer protecting all the soil, and much of the soil has now been lost. Typically in most major rivers in southern Ontario, you'll find a profile similar to this, where after the Europeans arrived, you get a very large amount of deposits along rivers because of soil loss due to deforestation. And that's getting extreme. This is a photograph of a friend of mine in Illinois. The Weston Cemetery Prairie is one of the few places in the Midwest which has not been plowed. It's a 6-acre property, and I set up my camera, and Angelo's standing on the prairie on the left, and then he's standing in the soy field on the right, and it's about a meter difference in soil level, and that's about 3 feet of soil that has been lost in the last 100 to 150 years. And how is that soil lost? It's lost by sheet erosion to some extent, but it's also lost due to agricultural practices, because when the farmers are tilling the soil, they're breaking up the organic and biological component. There are a lot of microorganisms, and when they die, they don't help recycle the carbon into the soil. And then as the soil dries out, the carbon starts to oxidize, and more carbon goes into the atmosphere. And as the carbon declines, then the ability of the soil to support the plant life above it starts to decline. And a whole bunch of other changes start to happen. In going back to the tropics, I'm going to show a diagram here. One of the features of forest is that they help keep the humidity of the soil higher so that it can absorb nutrients and carbon into the soil. This doesn't happen in the tropics. It's a different ecosystem. I'm talking mainly about the northern hemisphere here. But what does happen in the tropics is when you start to cut down forest, it starts to change rain cycles. The deforested areas become hotter and drier, and it starts to have local weather patterns. This is a photograph of some agricultural areas in the Amazon basin, and there's in the Amazon forest on the left. You can see how the sun energy coming into the ground starts to evaporate most of the water in the soil, and then it goes up into the atmosphere. And there are a couple of issues with that. This is a diagram which is going to lead into a discussion about a site in Ecuador, but it's essentially when there's good forest cover, you've got air moving up into the atmosphere, and then it goes into the cloud, and then the whole air mass system then moves towards the Andes, where it starts to form cloud over the Andes because it's cooler, and then it rains in the Andes. What happens in these areas in the Amazon is that the differential in pressure can start to cause local rainfalls. So not as much water is getting up into the Andes as used to get up. So it's starting to change not only the distribution of rainfall in the overall Amazon basin, it's also changing some of the larger weather patterns because these massive volumes of air no longer have the same amount of moisture and energy in them. It's not very well understood because the modeling capabilities are only being developed now, and it's but there's lots of evidence of that these changes are starting to have serious local effects. On the western coast of Ecuador, most of the forest, it's something like 95% of the forest, has been lost below 1,500 meters since World War II. I'm going to talk about a site down here in the southwestern part of the country in our Buenaventura Reserve, where I'm going to go over some research which comes right here. But note how there used to be a whole lot of forest, and then now there's very little forest. So looking at the same diagram, what we've got are smaller pieces of forest, so they're not producing as much moisture. The hot, dry air here is preventing the cloud from forming at a lower elevation. And these changes in the forest are changing changing various rainfall patterns and where the rain occurs. And this, you may have heard of this because it's happening in southern Ontario. The average rainfall is shifting, where it used to be lots of rainfall scattered over a period of time to a more bimodal distribution, where there's peaks and valleys of very strong peaks and valleys of rain. So there's more rain in a shorter period of time, and then there's a longer drier period between rainfall. What has been observed, and this is temperature data from the 1980s to just 2018, we at a site that I'm just about to show you in Ecuador, the temperature values have noticeably increased. And the real world implications of that, this is the Hocotoco's Buenaventura Reserve in Ecuador. And the reserve was established to protect this small parakeet called the El Oro parakeet. It's a communal nester. It's critically endangered. There's somewhere just over 1,000 of these. They have very strong fidelity to their sites, and to the parakeets. That valley is as wide as Lake Ontario is from Toronto to Buffalo. So looking at the genetics of the parakeets, the birds that are over here might fly across that valley once every 10 years. So there's very little exchange. So when the forest is removed, they're not able to interact with one another very much. Now, this photograph here is a very atypical condition. It's exactly this. There's the cloud is no longer forming over the mountain, and now there's only scattered clouds. The Buenaventura was famous for its rain, and now sunny days like this are typical. Usually the cloud would form over these lower mountains, and this is the same cloud formation that you would know if you've been to Costa Rica to see Monteverde. I mean, essentially the cloud forest is changing because the cloud forms at a much higher elevation than it used to form. Now, is that all happening? Is this just all short-term changes? A number of researchers went back to all the sites that Alexander von Humboldt visited in Ecuador in 1802, and they basically found that many species have moved up about 500 meters in elevation, and it's on average. And then the implications of this for the Erosion parakeet, or species like the Erosion parakeet, is that if the temperature, so the blue line is if the temperature goes up 2.6 degrees, this will be the elevational change. If it goes up 8.5 degrees, this will be the elevational change. And the net impact on that on the landscape is, if it doesn't go up very high, 2.6 degrees, the parakeet will be okay. But if it goes up 8.5 degrees, essentially there's no more forest at that elevation where the parakeet can live. So this is a pattern which is starting to appear in many places around the world. How this links to people is that in the Buenaventura Reserve, when we first started doing reforestation in the reserve 15 years ago, the local townspeople started to notice that the quantity and quality of water coming out of the Buenaventura Valley was much greater and better than before. So here's the Buenaventura, and there's a little town called Piñas here, and then Machala, and these are the bigger towns. And what the Ecuadorians have been discovering over the last 10, 15 years is that because of these bimodal rainfall distributions and shifted in the amount of rainfall, the rain is not going into their reservoirs. So we are working with the town to develop reforestation and biological corridors to protect their water sources, which is also going to protect some of these species. And the real on the ground impacts of that is that basically we are reforesting places like this to connect all of these forest patches. In another reserve in the very southern part of Ecuador, just on the border of Peru, this is an extremely dry forest, which has a short rainy season, and we've been doing reforestation since 2005. And again, this valley is a important water source for the town of Macará. And basically we bought some old rice fields, and then we've been converting it back to forest. They have the aerial photos here. This was a carbon balance program first started by the Body Shop, and then the Scottish and Southern Electric Company provided funding for this for carbon offsets, which seems to be a more popular idea, which is a good thing. And then this photograph was taken last year, 2019, the same place. I mean, the great thing about the tropics is that stuff grows. But one thing that Leo pointed out, this is Leo here, who I've spent a lot of time with, is that these cracks that used to form during the dry season are no longer occurring, and the soil is retaining more water. The humidity is higher. The plants are retaining their leaves longer. There's more green vegetation. There's lots of animals coming back. And then for the local town of Macará, which has about 30,000 people, their water resources are protected. So what is a similar situation to this in Ontario? Here's my dog, Inca. This is our farm that my wife and I purchased 15 years ago, and it's a 100-acre old tobacco farm, and we're converting it to black oak savanna prairie. And when we first got there, when it had been in agriculture since the 1930s, and when it would rain, the water would sit up on the surface of the sand and not get absorbed. and then it would pool like this and cause a lot of erosion. And I didn't really think very much of it at the time, but as the organic matter started to accumulate in the soil, we started to notice some changes. And I've just put up a diagram here. Different habitats have different ways of and different time periods for reabsorbing carbon and reestablishing the microbial biomass. But generally, it takes 20 to 30 years to get most of it back, and then to get the full amount that used to be there before pre-settlement can take hundreds of years. But this is a photograph from a couple of years ago, and now when it rains, the water absorbs immediately, and we have no erosion coming off of the farm. So all of these individual, like they seem like very small local effects, but they can have a very magnified effect over a broader scale. And how does this relate to migrants? All of these species, they spend a short bit of time up in Canada for breeding, and then they actually spend most of their time down in the tropics. But they have two very perilous journeys each year, getting back and forth between their summer and their wintering grounds. And if you look at what they face when they come into southern Ontario, the majority of the landscape is not friendly to birds. It's not friendly to insects. It's not friendly to mammals, especially creatures that have to migrate for so long. So this is what they see. There's just not very much green area here, and in addition to not being so good for the wildlife, it's not so good for us because the not having enough green space, not having enough wetlands doesn't protect our own drinking water or mitigate for flood control, and also leads to soil degradation that will affect agriculture. So one of the, here's rare up in here in Kitchener-Waterloo. And one of the great things I think about rare about all of this is it's got an opportunity to take these very big ideas and introduce them to an urban population. Too often, conservationists want to focus on the biggest and the best, or the rarest. But as Stephanie alluded earlier today, we also need to be concerned about the yellow warblers. At one time, the passenger pigeon used to be the commonest bird on the planet, and now it's extinct. So we can't always assume that just because something's common, that it's always going to be common. So the great thing for me about rare is it's put itself in the middle of an urban environment, and it's able to introduce all these environmental messages to a population who, in my experience, is generally receptive to them. So we could talk about what we're doing as organizations, but what can we do as individuals? We can support land trusts like Rare because they help to prevent the environment, and all of us can do something to mentor young people, taking them outside, taking them out to do birding. When I was a youngster, my parents had no idea what to do with somebody who was interested in birds, and I was very lucky to have a biology teacher and people like David Brewer, some of you might know him, or Larry Hubble, who used to take me birding and actually took me on my first trip to South America. Go visit natural places and support the local businesses that are there. So often, local businesses don't see the connection between people coming to visit the natural places and their pocketbook. And then do something in your backyard. We all have backyard. Most of us have backyards. It's there's a huge amount of land which is covered in lawns. This is one of the best books I've ever seen that discusses this issue. You know, choosing to plant an oak tree instead of a Norway maple can have a huge effect on birds. It can have a huge effect on insects. Changing your mind, you know, changing your point of view about what should constitute a front lawn. Some of you know about Larry Lamb and his planting prairies on his front lawn. I mean, there's all sorts of things that we can do to support the species or bird species pollinators, and also address some of the water and soil issues. And I think that's, I'm going to end on that. I see, well, somebody asked a question, which is, who is We Reforesting in Ecuador? That's the Hokotoko Foundation that Stephanie mentioned. And I think I'm, David Brewer says hi. Hi, Dave. Thank you for keeping me out of trouble when I was younger. Does anybody have any other questions?
I think there's one more question here, David. It's from Hugh. Tell us about your first pet bird, and then he says the goose.
Tell him I'll answer that if he gives Ray a good donation. That's my brother. Yes, we hatched a goose as part of a school project, and it was quite an experience. Any resources for starting to manage prairie land, especially dealing with invasive grasses? Yes, there are a lot of resources, and probably the best thing to do is to contact Stephanie, and I can give you a whole list of what you should look at. Partly it depends on how much land you want to put under. Invasive grasses are a real problem, and there are different ways to deal with it. Some people use herbicides like glyphosate. Some people don't want to use that. Basically, trying to plant a good seed mix after treatment of the soil to remove all the stuff that was there before is usually the best thing. Somebody's asked that it can take hundreds of years to restore agricultural soil. What is the study that provides information on that timescale? I have some studies from the States which go into that. What it is, the percentage, restoring the percentages of carbon and nitrogen and living material. So the majority of it happens within 30 to 50 years. This was a study on the Kanza Prairie site in areas like peatlands or in very cold climates in high altitude areas like Ecuador. It can take a huge amount of time. But in North America, we're blessed with very good growing season. We generally have good distribution of water. So through regular rainfall through the years, that soil can restore here fairly quickly.
Wonderful. David, if you want to stop sharing your presentation, I think then we can see you better when you speak. And we probably have time. There's a lot of questions coming in now. We probably have time for a couple of more, and the others we're happy to, I think, just keep answering maybe on our social media and other places.
Yeah. some of these questions are good, and I'd be happy to provide some information to people who want to follow up more. Okay, here's another question. Thanks. Robert Connell is talking about the Great Green Wall. Is he talking about that? Is that China? I've been lucky enough to see some of that restoration. It's actually pretty amazing what they're doing at that scale.
Oh, Rob is saying it's in Saharan Africa.
No, I don't know about that one, but that's.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it either, but I'm curious to look it up now. That sounds very interesting.
I see one person has written, does RARE have any concerns about Ontario now opening up more forested areas to clear cut logging? I'm going to answer personally because the organization shouldn't answer that, but it's not been shown to be a good way of managing land, and it's a terrible thing to do. Are you able to share any information regarding the film and the reception from government and businesses regarding safer space for birds? I do know that the city of Toronto is requiring bird dots for a lot of its buildings as part of its approval process. They are also requiring less lighting on buildings, especially at night. But those are hard to enforce. I don't know much about the provincial government. What can be done to educate cat owners about bird predation? Carefully send them a message.
Yeah, tell them the cats are much safer indoors, which is true. There used
Well, that's
to
true
be
because
a recent campaign by Nature Canada that was actually focused around promoting that message, because keeping cats indoors keeps both the birds and the cats safe.
Somebody asked an interesting question here. Should I cut down my huge Norway maple in my backyard, which is probably about 10 years old when the landscaper chose it 32 years ago? I wouldn't. What I would do is plant oak trees underneath it so that they can grow up and around it, and eventually they can replace the Norway maple. And basically, and you're replacing a forest structure there where younger trees grow up amongst the older trees. Am I optimistic with the announcements with the new U.S. president that with what is one of the most priority action items you will be watching as related to climate actions? Yes, I'm very hopeful, but I think we can get more done if we all do our own little bit, is my experience. And you know, you look at a reasonably sized group like RARE and the amount of leverage that it's getting to affect its local environment. You can get a lot done working with local groups, and hopefully that prods larger government action.
David, there's someone asking about I think a lot of people are interested in the native plantings, which is really exciting because it's something a lot of people can fairly easily do in their own yard. And so Bethany is asking if, with regards to native plants, does structure matter as much as composition? It's a really great question. I think from my perspective, I would say yes, it does matter, because plant architecture or architectural diversity has been shown to be quite impactful on insect diversity in particular.
There's lots of, I'll send some reference books, but I think RARE is doing some work with that for guiding people how to do some.
Yeah, absolutely. So keep your eyes peeled for that in this upcoming year, when we're likely going to start our 1000 garden challenge that will be very focused around native planting and native gardens. And we also have a lot of sample plantings around our community gardens in particular. if people need inspiration. Oh, here is Melanie is asking, she's particularly interested in native plants that will grow in the shade. So typically what I say is everything that's a woodland plant will thrive in shade because it typically grows in the understory where it is quite shaded.
One of the problems we have in Southern Ontario in urban environments, and it makes it difficult for people who want to do woodland type, put in woodland land type plants, is that we have a very strong dry period in the in late July and August, and one of the problems about the urban environment is that you get it exacerbates the heat in the summer, the heat and the dryness in the summer, and the freeze thaw effects. If you're out in a natural area, it's generally the shift in temperature between hot and cold is slower, and that freeze thaw can have a lot of can cause a lot of problems for the roots. And in you know, in a say an urban area or a suburban area, because you've got so much more urban heat island effect, you have to water more if you want urban woodland plants to survive.
Yeah, I've been certainly seeing that as well in my own yard. I have a few Solomon seal that have been really thriving, but there are some other woodland plants that have not been quite so successful. All right, I think this has probably covered most of the questions that I can see here. So yeah, wonderful presentation. David, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight. And thank you everyone for joining us here tonight for this excellent, interesting talk on how landscape conservation really goes hand in hand with the protection of birds. And I want to reiterate a very special thanks to our board of directors and several friends of RARE who, as I hear hot off the press during this talk, we have already raised now over $16,000 towards our $30,000 challenge. So thank you very much for your contributions to this, to turn the map green. And if you enjoyed this event, please, you can really double your impact here and help us meet our goal of 30K by visiting Canada Helps to Donate and share with your friends. And we really do hope that we see you again at our next conversation for conservation. And bring a friend. There's going to be a few more interesting talks and other interesting events coming down the line. And thank you very much for attending tonight, and have a good night. And watch your email for the links to more resources on native plant gardening that will be coming forward into your inboxes shortly. Thank you.